In this video, I'm going to show you how you can master n8n using only 12 nodes. By the end of this video, you'll be able to create full flows that can automate your tasks. If it's your first time here, my name is JD, I sold my first company and now I spend my days doing automation and AI products. Let's get started. Okay, so this is what we're going to be looking at today. We'll start with the triggers, then storage, flow and data, APIs, agents, websites and more. And once you're done with this, you'll be able to do pretty much anything you want in n8n. So, to start, the triggers. In n8n, anything works with nodes, and a node is just a block you'll put on your flow that will do something. To start the actual flow, we need a trigger. So the first trigger we have is a manual. So this just means you can click and it will start executing the next step. So you can see to execute this and go to next step. In this case, if I just click, you'll see it just turn green and you see that we are returning one item. So if I open, we can see there are no fields and we can see this is checked, which means we just created the trigger and sent the signal it should start. Then we have the on-form submission trigger. So how can you add the on-form submission? You just go here, you search forms and you'll see this n8n form. So you'll click and you can see you have the trigger here. Let's choose this. Let's place it and let's actually open. You can see that if you execute, a page is open and we can submit. And as you can see, we have an error. If we open the on-form submission, we can see something like this. This will be the URL you can use to access. So if you just click and paste, in this case, it isn't listening yet. So let's just give it a title. And then we can give it a description. It's optional. And this should be enough. So if we now execute the workflow, we can actually go to the link we've seen before and you'll see the title of the form. And if we click submit and go back to our flow, we can see now it was submitted. So if you open, you can see the time at which we submitted and also the form mode. Why is this interesting? If we open the form, we can see we have add form element. This is how you can add more fields to your form. So for example, let's do this. And we have a bunch of element types you can choose. In this case, I'm just doing a name, so I'll just keep it like this. And let's say the placeholder is JD, and we can make this required. So let's do that. And now if you execute our form, you'll see that I have to give it a name. So I'll do JD. And now if we go back to our flow, we can see that now we have a what is your name field with the name JD. Keep in mind, you have to actually execute the workflow for the form to work if you're testing. But if we go live, we can now access it directly by using the production URL. Let's do that. As you can see, we're not executing the workflow, but it's live. Let's do this again, try this again, and you'll see again, we have the result. Let's try and add another item to this form. So let's open. Let's call, for example, let's say, are you subscribed? And we can just either use a checkbox or maybe in this case it makes more sense a drop down. So let's try that. So yes, and let's add not yet. I'm subscribing now and make this required. So now if you execute the step, we see this again, JD, and on our form we can get these options. So I'll just say yes. And if I go back to n8n, you can see now I have the name and the are you subscribed field. So this is basically how you can start your application and collect some data. Moving now to storage. Storage is how you keep your data, how you persist it. And there are many types of storage, but we're just going to look at two. The first one will be Google Sheets. So if you just go here and search Sheets, you'll see something like this, and you can click it. And then we can choose Update Row. I have already created, let's move it here. I already created a demo sheet, which is like this, and I'm just going to put some fields, in this case name. I'm going to put here subscribed, and I'm going to put also the date. Basically, I'm just doing this. We add 3 columns, and now we're going to use n8n to add the rows. Let's open this. If you don't see the credentials here, make sure you follow this tutorial I made on how to connect Google Sheets. And then we have some options. So in this case, what we're going to do is a sheet within a document, and we want to update, or in this case, we can even insert or append a row. I'm going to change it to append a row instead of update. Then it asks me what's the document I want to actually change. So I'm going to change this to URL, and I'm going to copy the URL we had before. And after this, it will ask us the sheet we want to update. In this case, it only has one sheet, so let's do that. And we can see that we now have this option with the values to send. So for example, if I do this name, I'll do yes, and I'll do now. This doesn't make too much sense, but I'm not going to complicate it for now. And I'll execute the step. You can see the node is executing, so let's give it a minute. And now we have an output, which is exactly the input we just created. How did this work? We can see I have the name test name, the subscribed as yes, and the date as now. What happened here? When you're messing with the values to send, the first value will be the actual columns. n8n is fetching the values from your sheet, and it populates with these ones. And then you just tell them what to write on each field. Let's see an example of how we can use a form to actually do this. So before we add this, and this is a trigger, so you can just connect it. Let's move it a bit forward. And now I'll just execute the workflow. I'll fill the form. Let's just do yes. And if we go back, we can see now it's trying to do something. Since these values were hard-coded, they were added again as they are. So you'll see two test names, but this is not what we want. So we need to change this. So instead of doing it like this, we're going to change this to be an expression, and we're just going to drag and drop the fields. This is the form. We're getting the fields in the form, and we're saving them on a variable, which are these. And then we can just drag and drop, and we can use this submitted at to submit. So now if we run this again, and I'll do, for example, JD2, are you subscribed? So no, let's submit. And now if I go back to my workflow, we can see it received the values. If I hover with the mouse, or if I look here, I can see the actual result from the last step, and this is being forwarded. So now in my demo folder, we can see I now have JD here, and with all the data we expected. This is very useful because you can store data from your flows, and you can read it later and reuse it. The other trigger we're going to look at is the insert row. This is under the data table, which is a beta feature of n8n. And in this case, let's do again update row, and we'll see that we have an exclamation point, so we need to choose a data table. A data table basically is a n8n table that works sort of like Google Sheets, but it's on your n8n. So in this case, I can choose, but I don't have any, so I'll just create a new data table. I'll just give it a name. Let's call it test DT, and let's create. And now if I open, we can see we have something like this. So we have created that, updated that, and now we want to add some columns. So let's add the same ones we had in Excel. So let's do a name, it will be a string. Let's do a subscribed, which will also be a string in this case. We'll just leave it at that. And then in this case, we don't even need to add the date because we have the created that and updated that. You can access this by going to the n8n landing page, then you open the data tables, and here will be your tables, and you can use this to store data. Let's go here, let's open. So if you don't see your data table here, just close the node and then reopen, and you should see it. So I'll just choose testdb. We can see again, it automatically had the name and the subscribed here, which is what you're going to fill. Once again, we need to pass data to it, so I'll just connect our form from before here, and let's just run, and this is what we get again. Let's call it JD3, yes, submit. If you now go to our update row, we can see we have an error because we do not tell them what to put on the name or subscribe. So let's do this. Let's drag this to name, let's grab this to subscribed, and now if you execute just this step, We can see I had an error is actually because I was using the update instead of an insert. So let's change that to insert. Let's execute the step. And there we go. We're adding a row using the insert operation on this data table. And we're using these values, which you got from before, and inserting them in the data table. So let's go to the data table. And as you can see, now we have a new row. These two are the basic storage we're going to use. If you then need to read, instead of using as it is, we do something like this. So let's search for sheets and do Google Sheets first. And so we would want to get rows in sheet. We'll edit the same folder as we had before with the same link, and then we'll just add the same sheet. We'll just go get the same sheet. And then we have this option to filter. I'm not doing anything, I'll just fetch just so you can see the result. And as you can see, it's now fetching, and you'll see something like this, and you'll be able to see here that we actually have 3 items. We're not just fetching one, we have 3. If we change this to table, we can actually see the 3 items are fetching, one at a time, and the output of this would be actually 3 items, not just one. The same thing would work for getting rows from a data table, so let's do this. Data table. Let's get a row. And now we do the same stuff. We choose from the list or data table. We don't need any conditions, and we just need to get, and let's execute the step. In this case, you only have 1 item, so only 1 item was returned, but the same thing would work as it did on Google Sheets. So this is how you store and you get data. Let's see now what you can do with the actual data you're storing and getting. Let's now see what you can do with the data you're storing and getting. When we look at flow, the first flow element we'll see is the aggregate. So just do like this. Aggregate. The aggregate just joins fields in one. Before we saw on our Google Sheets, and let's get it back. Get row in sheet. Let's again paste the URL for our Google Sheets. And now let's get the actual sheet. And you can see if I run this and if I open, we have again the 3 items. So if we now connect this to the aggregate and we open, we can see that we have our items and we need to aggregate. So in this case, I'm going to aggregate and I'm going to just add row number. So let's execute. And you can see we aggregated the row numbers. If we now go to the output, instead of adding 3 items, as you can see, we went from 3 items to just 1. But let's suppose we want to get all the rows in 1 item. So just do all item data, we execute the step, and now we have a data object that has all the rows that we fetched from the table. So this is how you get a number of rows and make it just 1 item. But sometimes you want to do the actual opposite, so you want to split out. So let's see this. Here we go. In this case, let's connect it. What we do is the exact opposite. We drag the fields to split out. In this case, it's my data, and I don't think to do anything else. And now I'll just execute. And if you go back, we can see we now have 3 items again. So some operations will require just 1 item, some operations will require more than 1 item. For example, if you're giving all your information to a GPT, you might want it to have all the items, or you might have a flow that requires it to look at 1 item at a time. The next operation we have is the if. Let's put it here. What an if does is check if 1 condition is met. In this case, we have the conditions here, so I'm going to do if the row number is equal to 3. And in this case, since we're checking a number, we need to go to number and do the is equal to and execute step. And then we can see there are 2 outputs, the true branch, which is just 1, and the false branch, which has 2 items. So what's this doing? Since we're passing and looking at 3 items, it's going on the first item and it's checking if the row number is equal to 3, but it's not. So it's just adding it here. Then it goes again and does the same for the number 3. And since it is the same, it returns the true branch. Lastly, it goes to the next row, which is the number 4. And since number 4 is not equal to 3, it will return it as false. So this allows us to actually split our data into 2. Let's say, for example, we have a form and we want to filter people by age. We can just do an if and say, for example, if their age is superior to 65, we want to append them to a sheet, and if their age is under that, we might want to append it to another. So we will just use the if, change the condition to be a number is greater than, in this case, and it will be 65. Since we don't have any that's like this, as expected, all the branches will be false, but if you had a row number with 65, they would be real. So this is very powerful because it allows you to actually filter while keeping all the data and do some things in one condition and some things in another. So you can have separate flows and you decide based on that. So the next node we have is the wait node. So you can search it like this, as to wait. And wait is a very interesting node. It just allows you to stop for a while. In some cases, you don't want things to happen right away, but you want to give it a few seconds. For example, if I join this split out to my wait, and I actually add a trigger to all of this, and we run it, we can see it's getting the row, aggregating, splitting out, and then it will wait here for 5 seconds, and only then will it go for the if. So the wait just outputs the same as the input, so you can see it will be exactly the same, in this case just this, and that will be passed on. And this allows you to stop for a bit, and sometimes you need operations where you have to wait for something to happen before you can continue, and that's where the wait comes in. So lastly, the most important node you have in the flows is the actual code. So right now there are two codes. You can run either JavaScript or Python. Depending on your experience, you can choose either. What this code allows you to do is to actually write some code that you can put here. Now, you don't need to actually know how to write the code. You can use something like GPT to get the code. So let's say I want to write some code to get the date of today. We will just go to ChatGPT and ask it for the following. Give me a function to get the current date in JavaScript that I can use in n8n. We'll just send, and it will give us a bit of code. In this case, 2 bits of code. So we'll just copy this, go to our workflow, paste it, and run. And as you can see, we got the date. This might seem pretty simple, but it's actually very powerful. It allows you to do a ton of things, and basically everything we saw in the past nodes could be done here. We could, for example, wait for 5 seconds. Let's ask GPT to do it. So go to ChatGPT and ask it, give me a function that waits 5 seconds. Let's send it. And here you go. We'd copy this function and go here, paste it here, and it just run. And it would take 5 seconds to run, as you can see. All other nodes can actually be done with the JavaScript node, and that's why it's so powerful. And now with the support to Python, this opens even more doors. You might not need it for a while, but eventually, once you want to do something that's a little more out of the box, you're going to love to use the code in JavaScript. Okay, so next we're going to look at maybe the most important thing in this video, which are APIs and specifically HTTP requests. If you write HTTP, you'll see something like this. What's an HTTP request? An HTTP request just means you're asking something to a server. Basically, even your browser works like this. So for example, if I do this and I execute this node, we'll get something like this. This is actually the Google landing page. So it just does something to the Google server, which was the actual Google page, and it is sent as this as a response. Basically, you can use HTTP requests to call APIs. And what are APIs? APIs are the way we can communicate with specific code and programs. So if I'm a developer, I'm going to give you some options to actually interact with my code using APIs. For example, there's this web page, which is an API, an application programming interface, and if we want to communicate with it, we have to use a method called get, to get this actual URL. And if we execute this, we'd get something like this message and also a status of success. If you then copy this link and open it, we can see we get an image of a dog. Each time we call this specific API, we'll get a different message. In this case, we don't need any authentication, it's not paid, it's free. And there are instances where you'll need authentication and it's not paid, and there are instances where you need authentication and you actually need to pay. The authentication basically lets the server you're calling know who you are. It's useful, for example, again, if they want to charge you. I'm going to do a query to a different API, which is this one. It's a news API that basically lets you search worldwide news with code. In this case, if you go to our documentation, we can see we have an authentication tab here on the left. And it requires an API key. How do we get this? This depends on website to website and API to API, but in this case we can see we can send it in many ways. And if you create a free account, which you can create, no need for credit card, you'll get something like this. This is my API key. We can use this, the headers. So when you have an API request, you basically have headers and you have a body. The headers give you extra information that is not specifically to what you ask. For example, we saw here that we can use this inner header. As you can see, we can just send X API key, just go to headers, we'll define the X API key, and then we'll get our actual key here as the value. So now the server would know we were the ones asking it. If I actually go to the API documentation, so I'll just click on getting started, we can see we have here something, get the current top lines for a country or region, and it tells us we need to do this get. If we want, we can add the API key like this, but I think it's better to do it in the headers. So now we just paste the URL here. As you can see here, the method is still get. Sometimes, depending on what you're doing, you need to change the method. And I'll just hit execute step. As you can see, we now have a list of headlines. Let's try another example. Let's look at the docs, click here, and we can see we can specify a source, for example, BBC News. So let's copy this, it's still a get, and let's paste this and execute. And now we can see we are getting news only from the BBC News. You can see each news has a lot of stuff, like the author, title, a description, and even an URL. And this is basically how you can do an HTTP request to a server. If, for example, you want to implement stuff on your app like ways for people to pay, you won't actually build a credit card processor, but just go with Stripe, check out their API, and then follow the steps to actually integrate API. So APIs is one of the most powerful things you have in n8n because you can actually communicate with services that are not yet integrated as nodes in n8n. For example, if you take a look at this video, you can see that I use Kia AI, and using this API we can generate Sora videos much cheaper than you would with using just a Sora node. As a final tip, you can just, in an API, if you have a curl, you can copy it, and you can go to your node and click importccurl, and you'll paste it, and it will prefill everything for you, and you just have to execute the step and you get the same result. A lot of websites will give you theccurl, you can just import and you don't need to add anything else, even if it was empty. This is HTTP requests and APIs. I won't go too much in depth into this, but if you want to learn more, join our Soul community and I'll cover APIs in more detail there. Next step is one of the most used nodes in n8n, which are the actual agents, which is the step where you actually use AI stuff. If you click here, AI, you have this AI agent. Let's disconnect it. What an AI agent does is you can basically call something like GPT as if you were talking with the interface. What does this mean? I have an agent. If I open this agent, you can see that I can change this and I can give it a prompt. And this prompt will work like you were working on the LLM or the GPT or Claude or wherever you're choosing. So in order for this to use, you need to actually use a chat model. If you click here, you can see we have multiple options. And I'm going to show you how you can set up OpenAI. If I just search OpenAI chat model, you'll see something like this. But you won't have an account here. So you'll need to create a new credential. As you can see, as we mentioned before, it needs an API key. If you go here, you can see that OpenAI actually has an API. You'll need to log in or register in the API platform. And after you log in, you need to click on dashboard. And you can see you have a tab here, which is the API keys. And you see something like this, probably you won't have any key. And then you should create a new secret key. Now, when you create, it will ask you for a name. I'll call it n8n demo, and you can choose a project if you want, and then you need to click create secret key. Now, you should make sure you never share this with anyone, because again, each time you call OpenAI, you'll have a cost of a few cents, but if you give this to someone or a lot of people, they can actually rank up your account and you'll have to pay a big account at the end of the month. So make sure you store this privately and securely. So let's create a secret key, and you'll see something like this. Mine is blurred, but something like this. And then you just need to copy it. Make sure you store it somewhere safe. You only be able to see the API key once, and this is very common. But then you'll go back to your workflow and you'll paste the API key here. So you can leave the rest empty, but if you do this and now you save, you can close and you can see that now you are connected to OpenAI, and then you can choose models. Once we have this, we can actually use our agent. Let's test out a simple example. Let's open GPT. Let's tell it to tell me a joke. Now execute the workflow. You can see it takes a minute, and then if you open, we now have a joke. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. How can you actually use this agent in a useful manner? I'll show you a quick example. So let's actually delete this. Let's go to our form submission and get it. We can do something like this, where we have our form. For example, let's open, and the field we'll ask for will be the place. And we'll leave it as a text. And we can give a description, for example, what city, what place do you plan to visit? Something like this. And then if you run, it will ask us for a place. I'm going to say Chicago. And I'll submit. Now we have to change our AI agent, and let's tell you something like this. I'm going to visit, and then we just drag the place, Chicago. I want you to create a detailed itinerary of places to visit. So now we can execute. It will go to OpenAI and it will give us a result. And here we go. We have a little text output. We can see better here. And you can see it's giving us stops. Day 1, Chicago downtown morning, Millennium Park. So using this agent, you can really automate a lot of stuff. But one important thing to also know is how to use the actually output parser. For example, let's suppose we want to put this on Excel, but this is way too confusing. So let's click here where it says require specific output format, and it will show a message saying connect an output parser. So let's click this and let's click structured output parser, and you can see something like this. This is JSON. JSON is just a format you need to use to actually change how the response is. If you don't know how to use this, that's fine. Just go to ChatGPT, and in this case, I'm just going to tell me, give me a valid JSON format for an itinerary. Each point will have the name, best time to visit, and description, and we'll just send this. You can see it's giving his example, and we can just copy this. We go to our workflow and we'll paste. Now, what will happen is when you run our agent, it will actually try to format that way. So let's run it to see. Again, let's say Chicago. Let's submit. And if you go to our workflow, we can see it's running. And now if we open, we can see the output now is a little bit more structured. So we just don't have a bunch of text, we have actual things we can use. And the way we would use this, as we saw before, we would go here. We can use, for example, our split out. In this case, we want to split out just the points. So let's do this. And we'll execute. And we can see we now have 5 items. And now, for example, if we want to add this to an Excel, let's create a new one. Let's create a new one. So let's call it just places. Let's say description. Let's say best time. And then we copy the URL. Again, we go here. We've seen this before. We go to sheets. We want to append a row in the sheet. We choose by URL and enter our sheet URL, and then we just go to the sheet, try a different place, let's say Texas. Let's run. And now if we go to our n8n, let's give it a minute. You can see we have 5 items. You can see they were uploaded. And if we go to our sheet, we can see we now have this. As you can see, agents are very powerful and very useful, and is one of the things that made n8n as big as it is. And lastly, we're going to end up with a little node which I personally like very much, which is a webhook. So we'll just do like this. And I'll explain what this does. Before we saw we can actually make requests to our applications. How can you actually let other things call our application? The answer is a webhook. So if I click here, we can see when we have a webhook, we have a method, like the methods we saw before. We have a path, which I'm going to simplify. Let's call this cities. Again, we have authentication, which we do not require, and we want to respond when. If I copy this and I listen to an event, and now I go to the web page, we can see that we now have a message saying workflow has started. This is a trigger, like we saw before, and this trigger happens when we visit a web page. We can see there was a lot of output, which is code. And why is this so useful? Let's say, for example, we want to actually create a landing page. I can actually change this, and I can say respond using respond to webhook node. So that way there's a request and we don't just give a response like you saw, we actually wait for the respond to webhook. So now we add the respond to webhook, and we can choose what we want here. So I'm just going to do text, and I'm going, for example, to say hi. Now, if I run this and I visit the web page again and refresh, you can see I now get a web page with just hi. This node allows us to do simple web page, and then we can actually add our information to this web page. Let's see how we would actually do this. Let's here add our sheet from before, sheets. We want to get rows. Let's get our city sheet. Let's do like this. From URL and choose the base sheet. So if when you run it, we'll get this. So now we want to display that as HTML. In this case, we have 5 items and we just want one. So let's use our aggregator to aggregate. And in this case, you want to aggregate all item data. So if you run, we now have one single item with everything. So now I can go here, and if I want, I can just do something like this. And now again, if I execute the workflow and I refresh the page, we'll get the list here. And while this is interesting, this is not very useful. But if we go to ChatGPT, we can make this extremely useful. Let's go to GPT and ask it. Create a simple HTML page that will show information about a place. It will have the name, description, and best time to visit. I will manually change the items in the HTML, so just create a placeholder and let's send it. So after a minute we'll have something like this. Let's copy it. Let's go to our n8n and open our respond to webhook. And now let's actually expand this and change it to this. We don't need to really understand much, but we can see we have some places that we have to change, which are between brackets. For example, I'm just going to show the first place, so I'm going to do this. Places. Then I also want to change the description. So I'll remove this and I'll grab the description. And lastly, we have the best time to visit, which we'll just change this and drag and drop the best time to visit. If we now, once again, run this and go back to the website and refresh, we can see we now have a website with our information. It shows the Alamo, the description, and the best time to visit. So one last thing to know, if you wanted this web page to always be accessible, you would actually activate it. Just say got it, and then you click here and you'll have a production URL which you can visit. This is pretty much it. If you dominate these nodes, you'll know 80% of n8n, and then you'll just need to learn small module as you go, like how to set up Telegram. We covered APIs and it's using something like that. And so I hope this is helpful. Make sure to take a look at the other videos to see some interesting stuff you can do. And thanks for watching. See you next time.